Howdy, howdy, what's crack-a-lackin'? Welcome to episode 7 of the Back of the End Zone podcast. I'm Josh Ryzik, and I'm here with a new-looking Brian Kleski as he no longer has glasses, and he's got the clean shave going.
I still have glasses, but I mean, I got contact lenses after so many years of being told I couldn't have them. Tried LASIK surgery, that didn't work out, but now I have contacts, and right now I'm liking them, so it's...
So if at first y'all thought we had a new co-host here, no, it's still Brian. It's still the same Brian. And yeah, but so we're excited to dive right into today's episode. We're kind of going to take a little bit of a different approach, but we're going to focus primarily on Texas football.
They just had their spring game this past weekend.
Just had their spring game, looking at Quinn Ewers and Arch Manning, that kind of quarterback battle. If y'all didn't really see anything on social media with what happened between the two of them and how their performances were at their spring game. And
then we'll talk about Jalen Hurts getting the bag. I mean, highest paid player in NFL history. What that does for Lamar and the Ravens, and then also some stuff with the 49ers and Trey Lance, and also some more draft talk with the draft coming up in a week from today, be draft day. Hope all y'all will be watching Draft Day. That has Kevin Costner and Chadwick Boseman in it. That's a tradition now since that movie has come out. But no, it's going to be a really fun episode, and we're excited to dive right in. So here we go.
Let's get it. Segment 1.
All right, so Texas football. They had their spring game this past weekend. I believe out of all the spring games I saw this past weekend, I feel like they were the ones that really kind of stole the show because they did look really good. They looked polished, especially on offense. The defense could use a little bit of polishing up, but I mean they'll be fine, especially some of the recruits they got in this past recruiting class. What stuck out to me, and it really was a no-brainer but Quinn Ewers seems to be the guy. Oh. There was no quarterback controversy there, except for maybe the backup quarterback.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And Brian and I, we were just talking about this a couple minutes ago, and it's definitely Quinn Ewers. It's definitely his team. He's definitely going to be leading Texas's offense.
He looked in command. Yeah. He looked poised. Even though it's just a spring game, spring games are really watered down. You don't see a lot. I mean, the playbooks are very vanilla. They don't show a lot, but what they do show is the young guys getting experience. They show how, if there is a quarterback battle, how far along these quarterbacks are. They just show progress.
Exactly.
In my opinion.
And I mean, you just said that, the spring game is watered down, but looking at Arch Manning, to me, I was like, wow. Like, I knew he was overhyped as a recruit. I knew that the last name Manning was taking him to heights that maybe he shouldn't potentially be at, but seeing him in that spring game, I watched his highlight tape. Someone released on Twitter every single Arch Manning play that he was in. And there was just a lot of overthrown balls. There was nothing that impressed me. There was nothing where I was like, wow, this guy is generational talent. He deserved the rating that he had coming out of high school. And to me, I was like, I mean, he didn't look like anything special.
And there was a lot of controversy on this when he was coming out. Should he be the number one prospect? Should he be the number one quarterback prospect? And while I do think he was in the discussion for top 3, I didn't think he should have been the number one quarterback prospect. There were 2 guys I liked ahead of him. Dante Moore, that is now at UCLA, and then Malachi Nelson. Well, Malachi Nelson and then Nico Yamavea. I can't say his last name. I apologize.
I mean, all of them.
I mean, and he showed out when we talk about Tennessee. He showed out. He might be battling for the starting job at Tennessee, but we'll talk about them in a later episode. But there were a couple, 2 or 3 guys that I felt were ahead of Arch. There was controversy on whether or not the competition he played in at that school in Louisiana was very, I don't want to say weak, but it was definitely not anything like
it wasn't anything special.
But then when they got in the playoffs, that high school that he was at struggled, and they were usually early exits, or if they got to a state championship, they got beat. But I mean, he's still young.
That's the one thing too. I can't bash him too much.
And he's got the best mentors anybody could ask for. I mean,
it's a spring game. He early enrolled, so you got to think about it. He could still be a senior in high school right now. So yes,
Yeah.
like he's bound to show shaky moments. Like he's an 18-year-old amongst a ton of other 20-year-olds, 19-year-olds, whatever. But like still though, there is a lot for him to improve to get to where he needs to be.
I do think it is time to pump the brakes on that. You know, Quinn Ewers showed he was the guy, but the second string quarterback Malik Murphy was the one who I think impressed me the most because amid all the talk about Ewers and Manning,
Archie, yeah.
here he comes throwing dimes to freshman wide receiver Jonte Cook, which I love this dude. I wish he'd have came to Alabama. It was between Texas and Alabama with him. He was the one. If y'all remember, he went to Texas A&M's locker room or facilities and said they ain't got no trophies in here.
Yeah.
Which he still proceeded to go to Texas, where there's not many. I mean, there's a lot more trophies in A&M, but still
but not as much.
Not
Like
as
in
much as
recent years.
Alabama.
Yeah, exactly.
But no, I like that. I really like that kid. I think he's got an opportunity to produce day one for Texas at wide receiver.
I think another thing, too, is we just talked about it, too. Talking about receivers, they have Xavier Worthy coming back, phenomenal receiver, and they added A.D. Mitchell in the transfer portal from Georgia. And that is what
Georgia's
scares
number
me.
one guy.
Yeah, because there's a lot of people, the ESPN FPI rankings were just released, too, and Texas was up there to possibly compete in the playoff this upcoming year. And I know it's way too early to even be talking about that. And honestly, I think they could have a chance, but I think that's very unlikely. But with those additions to offense, with Xavier Worthy coming back and A.D. Mitchell and Ewers behind the reins, I mean, Texas could make a run for their money. Shifting over to Texas's season, week 2 at Bryant-Denny in Tuscaloosa.
That's going to be to me, that's not the end-all, be-all for them. Even if they lose that game, of course, last year they lost that game by a point. Quinn Ewers got hurt. I mean, as a Bama fan, if Quinn Ewers doesn't get hurt, Bama probably loses that game by a couple touchdowns. But to me, that one's not the end-all, be-all for them because even if they lose that game, say they play Alabama close again, they lose by a touchdown, they lose by a field goal.
They can still end up getting in. They win the Big 12.
They win out. They win the Big 12. I think Texas has a real shot, and I know you always hear it every year, Texas is back, or is Texas going to be back? But I like this recruiting class they had. They
had a phenomenal recruiting class.
They finished number 3. They added a linebacker, Anthony Hill, who flipped from A&M to Texas. They added a running back, Cedric Baxter, who could be in the running to replace Bijan Robinson. They got some corners that I like. Malik Muhammad is a really good corner.
They picked up Jalen Catalon, a 4-star safety from Arkansas in the portal too, and it's like, I mean, Texas is definitely going to be running the Big 12 the next couple of years. 100%.
Well, they're not next couple of years. Texas will
this
be
year, this year, and then. But I mean, if they were still in the Big 12, they would be running it for sure. I don't think Oklahoma is nowhere near after their Lincoln Riley days are over, and their Lincoln Riley days was at the peak of what they'll ever be at.
Oklahoma is still a blue blood program. So is Texas. So I mean, when they come to the SEC, I do think Texas will be the early success team out of the two.
Yeah, 100%.
And I don't know. I haven't really looked at the recruiting class this year because it's still very early in the recruiting process. But I still think they got a lot of guys coming in, and now they can begin to pitch the SEC.
Yep.
Them and Oklahoma can begin to pitch the fact that next year they will be in the SEC
to all these recruits. Yeah,
they'll be playing against the best.
It's a great
all the revenue and
literally.
NIL opportunities that are in the SEC. No offense to any other conference.
Can't believe you.
It's true.
I agree, and I mean they're definitely on the come up. I mean, Oklahoma going to the SEC, to me, I'm like, that's not going to be good for them. It's going to be a bloodbath. But
Oklahoma has, to me, and we'll talk about it later when we talk Oklahoma. Oklahoma has the advantage right now when it comes to defense, and that's really what you need going into the SEC. But Texas, I think, Texas, I think, had a very underrated defense last year. They held Alabama, who averages over 30 points a game to just 20 points.
Yeah, and they won. You guys won by 1.
Exactly, and now they lost some guys on defense. They lost, one of my favorite players to watch last year was Devon Overshown, their linebacker, who when they played us, when we went to Austin, he was all over the place. When he was stuffing the run game, he was pressuring Bryce Young. So Texas, I feel like, I like where they're at. I like their recruiting class. Now, when it comes to their quarterback situation, I think,
I think Ewers wins that. I think he wins it easy.
Ewers is the guy, but second, like say Ewers gets hurt, I think it's the Malik Murphy show if
I
Ewers
agree.
is to get hurt again.
I agree. And I mean, just as of right now, and I know it's
Now-
really, really early, but what I want
Yeah.
to say is, I don't think Arch Manning is equipped to start this year. I
No.
think he can be really good, but I don't think he would
Now,
start
I-
at most other Power 5 schools this year.
Now,
Personally.
I
But-
think he will be the guy. I think he'll be the guy next year when the first year in the SEC. I do think he'll be the guy, and he'll be much more polished. But the Malik Murphy kid, he and then speaking of transferring and the transfer portal, the 15-day window of the second wave of the transfer portal is open. You also seen some guys. There were a lot of Texas players that transferred out the day of the spring game, but I mean, still, I think Texas will be fine.
Oh, I don't think it's anything to worry about for him. But, I mean,
But that Malik Murphy kid, he might, if he feels like he's not, they're very committed to Arch, and all the money that they have invested in Arch, he could transfer out and go to somewhere, and I think start day one. I mean, so Texas has a lot going their way. When it comes to the season in general and what plagued them last season, it's just being able to finish games. And you saw it, Bama, they let Bama come back early in the
yeah, literally.
and then they let TCU. I think they were up on TCU and they let them come back. They just weren't able to finish games. Now they did beat the shit out of Oklahoma last year. I was like what 49-0.
Yeah, 49-0
And
in
then-
that Red River rivalry, but
But I think it just comes down to, can they finish games? Can they win the bigger games? Can they pull off the upset September 9th at Bryant-Denny? Can they beat TCU? Can they beat Oklahoma? I mean, which we saw that last year. Just can they win those games, and can they perform? When the lights are the brightest, and that's really where it boils down to me for Texas. I like what they've done. So
I mean, I mean, I don't really have anything else to say because I'm not huge into the Big 12, but I mean, obviously being an Ohio State fan, I knew what Ewers was and what he can bring to the table, and seeing what he brought to the table last year. It's Texas's offense is going to be elite, and I think that's what's going to bring I mean, their defense is good, but their offense is phenomenal.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's going to reach them to bigger heights next year.
And Sark is a great coach, and he was on the Pivot podcast that has Ryan Clark. I forget the guy's names, but it's Ryan Clark and a couple other guys that do the podcast, and he talks about how Nick Saban saved his career and that he's thankful for that. And Sark, I believe, is a really good coach, really bright. I think he's got the program headed in the right direction. I think he is the guy for Texas moving forward. And coming into the SEC, he knows what to expect. He knows what to expect coming into the SEC. He knows what kind of environments they'll be going into when they go to Death Valley,
100%.
when they go to
exactly.
when they go to the Grove at Ole Miss, when they go to Athens in Georgia, and when teams come into them. I mean, Austin, last season when Bama played at Austin, there was like over 109,000 people, like 110,000
Which is
people
crazy.
last year.
I mean, especially for a Big 12 game.
And
thinking about
especially
that,
when it was it was in September. It was. I'm sure it was hot as hell. I mean, those people in Austin are just as committed as SEC people.
yeah,
and
100%.
And I remember hearing Will Anderson after the game saying that's the loudest environment he's ever played in.
Which is crazy.
And Austin.
Thinking about that, yeah.
So for
It'll be cool to see them transition into the SEC.
yeah, so they got an SEC type environment. They got SEC type money, facilities.
Oh yeah.
They have the resources.
The name too, like it's Texas.
Yeah, they have the brand
yeah,
as well to
exactly.
come into the
Like-
SEC. Maybe not, compete right away, but I think they'll get to the point where they will be there.
Oh no, I definitely agree. And I mean, I think me personally, I don't really have much else to say about Texas, unless if you do. But I mean,
I just think watch out for Texas this year. I do think they could be a potential contender for the playoff. Especially if they win if they're to beat Bama and they get all that momentum going, then yes, they will be a contender, or they will be an early contender. But even if they don't beat Bama, if they lose a close one to Bama, which I do think it'll be a close game, I do think I think Texas is fine. I think they're trending up. I do think contrary to popular belief, I do think Texas is trending to being back.
Yeah,
So-
I mean, I think so too. But I mean, shifting over to in more recent news too, looking at Jalen Hurts,
Jalen Hurts, man, what a
highest paid player.
what a journey for Jalen Hurts.
Oh
man.
yeah,
I
literally
mean,
thinking about it, 2018 getting benched in the playoff game,
in the national
yeah, in
championship
the national
game.
championship,
and then having to come off the bench and
behind Carson Wentz.
hold on,
right,
having to
okay,
come
yeah,
off the
yeah,
bench
yeah.
in the 2018 SEC championship game when Tua went down, winning that. He stayed a whole other year at Bama behind Tua, want to get better. Then he transferred to Oklahoma. Say what you want, whether you're Oklahoma fan, Alabama fan, you claim him. He's both. He said that he's for both. You can support him whether or not you're Bama, Oklahoma, whether you're a fan of when you're not, even if you're not a fan of either of those teams. Jalen is one of the most easy people to root for right now, and the contract he just got just makes me happy for him, man.
Yeah, no, it makes me happy too. And there's a lot of people questioning it, but I definitely think he deserves it. He is generational. He's a great, phenomenal quarterback. He's amazing at what he does. And a Philadelphia Eagles fan page posted a thing of current, because people are like, oh, Jalen can't win a Super Bowl. He obviously just lost this past year, but they put a list naming the current like NFL quarterbacks that have won Super Bowls, and that list is Pat Mahomes, Joe Burrow, Matt Stafford, Jimmy Garoppolo, Jared Goff, Tom Brady, who just retired, Matt Ryan, Russell Wilson, Cam Newton, who's trying to get a job, Peyton Manning, who's gone, and then Nick Foles. But you listen to that list, and it's like Jalen deserves that money. You look at Burrow, I honestly think he's better than Burrow. I feel like just there may be a couple guys that are
I'd pop
up
the
there
brakes
with
on
him,
that a little bit, but
no, trust me. I mean, I get it, but I don't think he's better than Mahomes, but I think he will get to that talent. Looking at like where Mahomes' career started, I think that Jalen Hurts, in a couple years down the road, he's going to win a couple Super Bowls. Like, give it 6-7 years, I think he mimight have 2 Super Bowl rings under his belt.
And man, he got the bag. $255 million, $51 million a year. I mean, the highest contract in NFL history. The dude is set. I mean, and having no trade clause in his contract, so if things were to get messy, whether or not it's the organization or I don't think it'll ever be him, just because knowing Jalen, But man, it's
and he's humble too. Like,
and he's humble.
He deserved this too, and I don't think he's anything. I feel like he doesn't get, up until this happened, like he hasn't always gotten the credit that he's deserved, because he's a phenomenal quarterback, and being in the NFC too, like it's not like. I mean, a lot of people, like, you will always crap on NFC quarterbacks, but not Jalen.
Not Jalen.
But, like, the guys that aren't as good in the NFC. And because there's not a lot of good quarterbacks in the NFC.
But, like,
his
journey, though, like, it's literally a movie. I
mean, inspirational.
When you think about what he's gone through, being one of the first freshman starters ever at Alabama, then getting benched in the national championship game 2 years later after leading them to 2 natties in a row, losing that one to Clemson at the beginning when it was Deshaun Watson, to Hunter Renfrow, I still think it was a big play, but and then against Georgia getting benched, and then staying one more year to learn under and not having any bad blood between there's no bad blood between him and Tua. They love each other, and then going to Oklahoma, Lincoln Riley was able to polish him, get him ready for the next level, and then everybody thought when the Eagles drafted him in the second round that they were crazy. That they had Carson Wentz, there was no reason to draft Jalen Hurts, but it proved out to be the right pick, and I can tell you Eagles fans are extremely satisfied.
They are extremely satisfied, and something that's even more extremely satisfying too is Schefter put out a tweet showing how much each and every single year, how much cap space the Eagles have. Next year, they have $6.15 million. Year after that, a little over $13 million. 2025, they have a little over $21 million, and then 2026, they have $31 million. Somehow they still have, even with that huge signing, they're still going to have cap.
And they're going to have, they're going to be able to be flexible with it. I've seen, they'll be able to be flexible in certain areas, especially, if they want to restructure, 1 year, especially like maybe next year where they only have like $6 million in cap. But I mean, they still have a young team. They still have a very young team, or not?
Oh yeah,
And
they did lose a couple pieces.
they have the
did,
10th
but,
overall.
like,
They have like 2 first-round picks this year. So,
exactly,
I mean,
and I mean, like, it sucks. Like, yeah, losing Miles Sanders and CJ Gardner Johnson, and like, yeah, they lost a couple key guys. TJ Edwards, like, they lost. I think they lost a couple big name guys, but they're so young. It's gonna make up for it. Like,
And
they have, and this team is being built around Jalen. It's being catered to his needs. That they're going to be another. They're probably going to come out of the NFC next year. I hate saying that, but it'll probably happen.
they're my favorite. I know you had the Lions.
I mean, that's like a dark horse favorite, kind of just rooting for the NFC North. But I mean, the Eagles probably will end up coming out of the NFC next year.
Just the Eagles, though, they're trending up, and I remember when they hired Nick Sirianni, and everybody thought, his first press conference was a little weird, and people already wrote him down as a bust. The dude can coach, and
he can.
And had it not been for a questionable non-call in the Super Bowl that gave the Chiefs a Super Bowl, I think the Eagles would win that game. I'm not going to sit here. I'm not going to sit here and say that the refs won the game versus Kansas City. I just
Stuff like that happens all the time.
I just pick on Kansas City because I dislike them. I'm a Broncos fan. I dislike the Chiefs, but no, man, the Eagles are going to be really good. So going to the 49ers, though, they talk about a different quarterback situation.
Literally going from
who played the Eagles in the NFC Championship game.
Yeah, I mean, that's a whole interesting scenario right there. Going from Jimmy G 3 years ago, drafting Trey Lance, then
number
Jimmy
3
G,
overall,
and still re-signing Jimmy G. Jimmy G ends up, Trey Lance gets hurt, whatever. All this mumbo jumbo goes on.
Then Brock Purdy comes out of nowhere,
and now it's like they're
Mr. Irrelevant.
Yeah, then obviously lose Jimmy G Jimmy G goes to the Raiders, and now it's Brock Purdy or Trey Lance, and trending as of today, Trey Lance is looking at the Niners are shopping Trey Lance.
They're fielding calls.
Yeah, literally.
And I think it's just interesting because it makes you. I've been saying it today when a story first broke. It really makes. I thought Trey Lance was really good coming out of college, but he had played very few games because of what happened in 2020. He was a little bit raw as a prospect, but still. I thought
had the talent.
I thought he was. At the time, I thought he was worthy enough being the 3rd overall pick.
To me, I don't know.
But 2 years ago, it makes you wonder. Now you look at it now. You like, the 49ers don't need him. They got Brock Purdy, or they could go for somebody else. Because they have the money and they'll have a draft. They could draft somebody next year. But they gave up. They gave up 3 first-round draft picks to the Dolphins to trade up from, I believe it was 12 to 3 to get Trey Lance.
And it's just like, looking at it now, it's like he hasn't really showed much of anything, but he hasn't had the real chance to.
Yeah.
But right now, this is like the best opportunity for the Niners to trade him. Because say he's a complete bust, if they want to trade him, they need to trade him now before anything.
But they're not going to get. I don't think they're going to get a first-round pick
I don't
out
think
of him.
They're first round either. They'd be
know
lucky to get a third.
I don't even know if they get a second. From what I understand, it was the fact that in practices he didn't look great. I don't know if he was meshing well with the Shanahan system. It makes you wonder. I was saying earlier, it makes you wonder if the 49ers should have drafted Mac Jones or Justin Fields at 3 instead of Trey Lance.
I think either of those situations.
I remember everybody thought it was going to be Mac, because of the Shanahan, I think Mac would have fared better in the Shanahan system just because he was already kind of polished, but I don't know. The 49ers, that's a very interesting case because Brock Purdy's still hurt from the injury he got against
he hasn't been cleared
Eagles
for anything yet.
I think it was like a UCL or something in his elbow, and I saw something yesterday where he could be out for the season. So do you really think about trading Trey Lance, or do you trade Trey Lance and then you take a chance on one of these mid-tier rookies in the mid rounds, like say if a Hendon Hooker falls to the 2nd or 3rd round.
Yeah, do you take him
or maybe a
Max Duggan or
maybe
something like
Stetson
that.
Bennett. You take a chance on one of those guys because it seems like other than Trey Lance, and Trey Lance did show flashes, that quarterbacks just seem to work in the Shanahan system. I don't know what it is. You had Jimmy G. You had Nick Mullins, who played well when he got his chance in San Francisco. You know, Shanahan did well with Matt Ryan when he was with the Falcons.
Yep.
Then you have that tree when it's with Sean McVay, Mike LaFleur,
And Shanahan, yeah.
Matt LaFleur. You know, that Shanahan tree is very strong in the NFL. It's kind of like the Saban tree of the NFL.
Yeah, exactly.
So the 49ers it's very interesting because, and I think they handled the Jimmy G situation kind of poorly just because they could have. I think they should have held on to Jimmy G. I think Jimmy G, other than being injury prone, was a fairly decent quarterback.
Yeah, he was.
And he could manage that system inside and out. He was one overthrow to Emmanuel Sanders away from potentially beating Patrick Mahomes in the Super Bowl. So.
Yep. And I mean, you look at the Raiders taking Jimmy G. Sorry to go a little off track on a tangent, but the Raiders got rid of mid-all-right Derek Carr for mid-all-right Jimmy Garoppolo. Both of them are good. I think they're better, a step above mid, but they're nothing crazy.
Yeah, they're nothing.
And like, at this point, I feel like it was sad to see the 49ers let him go.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was bound to happen anyway. Everyone knew it was going to happen, but it's like he's like your old reliable to pull out and whip out in cases of Brock Purdy getting injured and Trey Lance too. So
switching back to contract stuff, the Jalen Hurts contract, to me, I felt like Lamar. I think this was the best case scenario. You know, yesterday when the contract first came out, I felt like this is why the Ravens should have paid him earlier because how do I say this? Because now the market is only trending up, and now you're going to have to pay him a little bit more. I don't know, or pay him the same as Jalen, because while Jalen hasn't won, while Lamar hasn't, been to a Super Bowl yet, he still won an MVP.
Yeah.
And he's still, but there are concerns about Lamar's, health. He hasn't been able to stay healthy at both ending points of the season the past 2 years. But I think now that I think on it, I think it helps Lamar because, a lot of people thought he was wanting that Deshaun Watson type contract. And the league, and I saw this yesterday. Somebody pointed it out on TikTok or on Twitter where they're making it. The league with this Jalen Hurts contract, they're making it a point to make sure that was just an outlier by the Browns.
Yeah.
Because if you look at the pay, while Jalen got, $258 million or $255 million, however much it was, he only got $180 million guaranteed. That's like a $70 million gap between the full contract and the guaranteed.
Yep.
So I think, not only helps, but it helps Lamar. And I saw something where I think it was Ian Rappaport, he talked about it on the Pat McAfee show where the Ravens now have offered him $200 million guaranteed. I'm sure it's around the same numbers as Jalen's, just a little bit more guaranteed. So, they signed OBJ at the end of last week. I do think that's a sign.
Oh, I think that's a sign Lamar's going to stay too. There was rumors that Lamar wanted either DeAndre Hopkins or OBJ.
Or both.
Or both, yeah. And they ended up getting OBJ. And I mean, I don't know how to feel about that. I don't think OBJ is. I think OBJ is on the decline.
He's certainly not what he used to be.
Oh, yeah, exactly. But I mean, he's still phenomenal, but he's just very
He's still the best receiver they've got right now.
Yeah, he definitely is. And I mean, you got to think the Ravens still have Mark Andrews. They have a couple other guys on their offense.
J.K. Dobbins.
Yeah, J.K. Dobbins is a tank. And
their defense will be pretty good as usual.
Yeah, per usual.
So I mean, the Ravens, I think they're trending to get Lamar back. So now we're going to shift to some more draft talk to end the show. How about the Texans? The Texans, last week we talked about the Cardinals potentially trading number 3 pick. We never considered the fact that the Texans might be fielding calls or are fielding calls on the number 2 pick.
Exactly, and that's, I don't know, to me that's just interesting because I thought it was almost.
This is further proof, and don't get mad at me, that Bryce is the Panthers' choice at 1.
Trust me, I think at this point it's known to everyone that Bryce is the Panthers' pick at 1. You nodding your head in happiness about that. But, I mean, I think it's just interesting because I thought it was a clear-cut given that the Texans either wanted Stroud or Young, and now it's like,
They wanted Young over
Yeah,
Stroud.
exactly. And so now it's like they're willing to trade back, but then who do they want at this point? Who do they want to take? Who do they want to trade back and try grabbing? Because how far are they willing to trade back? That's the question.
That's the thing. And I saw a mock draft yesterday. I think it was from Peter Schrager from NFL Network. He had the Colts trading up with the Texans, which I don't think that would happen because they're in division rivals, getting C.J. Stroud. But I've also seen stuff where the Falcons could come up from 8-2 or 8-3. The Colts are still in play, especially for number 3. If Houston stays where they're at, and they take Will Anderson. But the Texans, I don't see why you just don't like. To me, I don't see, and I see where they're coming from but why don't you? Even if you don't want Stroud, you can sit there and take Will Anderson. I mean,
exactly.
Because more than likely,
if they're trading back, they're not going to trade back to 3. They're going to be trading back a couple spots.
They're going to still stay in the top 10 because they have another pick at 12.
Yeah.
So what I think, I think they should just stay at 2 because and maybe they could try and trade up back into the top 10. I mean, I don't know how well that's going to go, but
yeah, I really don't know. It's definitely an interesting scenario considering, like you said, last week we're talking about the Cardinals trading back. Now it's like the Texans potentially are, and it's.
I had a scenario last week before we talked about the Cardinals where the Texans, would be in a great position to try, if Stroud falls to, them, they could take Will Anderson at 2 and then trade back up to number 3 with the Cardinals and take C.J. Stroud, but I don't think that's going to happen. I've even seen where Stroud could slide to 4. Where the Colts could just stay where they are and take Stroud at 4. So it's really interesting to see the Texans. More than likely, if they don't take a quarterback, they're going to end up right back in the top 5 next year. So I mean, I think they're looking forward to next year's draft.
Yeah. And I think they know that there's not much to look forward to this upcoming season.
Now, if for some reason, Carolina decides to pivot and go Anthony Richardson or C.J. Stroud last minute, then Bryce Young is still on the table. Then I'm assuming they're still going to take Bryce Young.
Yeah,
I mean,
100%.
But as of right now, I believe it's shaking up to be Bryce Young number 1 pick, and
it'll be a draft night decision.
And then
for the Texans,
and then after that, it's really who's who. I mean, what happens then? Because that's really only definite, right now that
literally.
We kind of have is that Bryce Young is probably the number 1 pick, and then Will Anderson, C.J. Stroud, Jalen Carter, Anthony Richardson, they'll all go in the top 10, top 5, but it's like where? You don't really know. I mean, so it's going to be interesting. I love draft day, draft.
It's coming up. It'll be here before we know it, and there's going to be some interesting. I mean, every year is interesting to see what happens, but I mean, this year it's exciting with all the quarterbacks and just all the talent in this year's draft class. So
and next week, I mean, we've discussed it. If we're able to, we might go live during the draft. It all depends on
what works out schedule-wise and whatnot.
Yeah,
it'll be interesting to see what happens. But, and next week we hope to have hopefully a crazy kind of different outlook on the episode about the draft specifically.
It's going to be more draft coverage next week because it'll be draft week, it'll be draft day, or draft weekend. There's a couple guys from South that are hoping to be drafted next weekend. We're going to try to get them on.
We'll see what happens. But,
see what happens. So
I mean, it'll be interesting to see what happens, and I mean.
And Texas is on his way back.
I mean, we'll see about that, but I mean, I think it's potentially bound to happen. But yeah, so thank you for tuning in to episode 7 of Back in the End Zone. Y'all are gonna have to get used to Bryant without his glasses, but
a lot of people will because it's. I mean, over 15 years of wearing glasses, it's gonna take some getting used to. So.
Heck yeah, but it's been a blast. Like, subscribe, share. Give us a rating on Spotify. If you're listening to this right now, give us a rating.
Rating on Apple, Spotify, YouTube. Like it, dislike it. I mean,
heck yeah.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Share your feedback with us. So.
Exactly. And thanks for tuning in. And
see you next week.